It was supposed to be one of those races, one that fans remember for years. Spa-Francorchamps, under rain clouds, promising drama, unpredictability, and the kind of chaos that Formula One was built on. Drivers had prepared for it. Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, and others had opted for high downforce setups, anticipating a wet race where grip and car control would matter more than straight-line speed. These were the conditions that separate the good from the great, the environment where instincts take over, where the tiniest mistake can end it all, and where true champions rise. But as the clock ticked down 2 lights out, something strange happened. Nothing. For more than an hour, fans around the world waited. The race was postponed, the engines stayed cold, and the action stayed frozen, not because the rain was too heavy, but because Formula One is changing. When the FIA finally decided to get the race underway, it wasn't the high-stakes standing start everyone had hoped for. It began behind the safety car. The tension had drained. The wet track advantage that certain teams had built their strategy around had evaporated with the rain. What followed was a handful of laps with little overtaking and almost no real wheel-to-wheel combat. Verstappen and Hamilton, 2 of the greatest wet-weather drivers in the sport's history, were left frustrated. "We could have gone racing an hour earlier," Max said. Hamilton, too, voiced his frustration, repeatedly insisting over the radio that the track was ready. These are not hot-headed rookies venting emotion. They're seasoned veterans who know what they're talking about. And yet, their input seemed to carry little weight with the governing body. Formula One had traded risk for restraint, and in doing so, it lost the very soul of what this race could have been. But this wasn't just about one race. This was about the growing tension between spectacle and safety, between tradition and transformation. Fans didn't tune in to watch a rolling start after an hour-long delay. They came for the rawness of motorsport, spray flying, tires slipping, drivers wrestling machines through treacherous corners. But the FIA's decision cast a shadow over the weekend, leaving everyone to wonder, is Formula One still the pinnacle of motorsport, or is it becoming too sanitized, too controlled, and too afraid of the very elements that once defined its greatness? To understand why Spa became such a disappointment, we need to look beyond the raw emotion of frustrated drivers and dig into the technical and regulatory decisions that led us here. The FIA's reasoning wasn't entirely baseless. Today's ground-effect Formula One cars generate an enormous amount of spray in wet conditions. That spray drastically reduces visibility, so much so that drivers can't even see the rear wing of the car in front. That's not just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. One of the most jarring examples of this came at Silverstone, when Isaac Hayar in Formula 2 rear-ended Kimi Antonelli simply because he couldn't see him. These kinds of incidents aren't hypothetical anymore. They're happening. The risk of aquaplaning on standing water adds to the concern. And then there's Eau Rouge and Rédelon, 2 of the most iconic, but also lethal corners in motorsport history. In dry conditions, they demand perfection. In the wet, they can become fatal. So, yes, the FIA has reasons to be cautious. Tragedies like the deaths of Antoine Hubert in 2019 and Delano Van Tiehoff in 2023 are still fresh wounds. Nobody wants to see a repeat of Suzuka 2014 or Spa 2019, when poor visibility and standing water contributed to catastrophic outcomes. And in fairness, after Silverstone this year, the FIA did hold a meeting with drivers who expressed serious concerns about starting races too soon in heavy rain. They listened. But then, perhaps, they listened too much. What we saw at Spa wasn't safety, it was paralysis. And that raises a critical question. If a Grade 1 circuit like Spa is no longer considered safe for wet racing, then why is it still on the calendar? The problem isn't just the track, it's the combination of the cars, the tires, and the fear of litigation that has crept into race direction decisions. Modern F1 cars are massive, over 5 meters long and 2 meters wide. They're also far more sensitive to dirty air and floor damage than any generation before. The operating window of the current tires is ridiculously narrow, and when it comes to the full wet Pirelli tire, drivers avoid it like the plague. It clears 85 liters of water per second, which sounds impressive until you realize that all that water has to go somewhere, usually into the air, into the driver's face, and into another cloud of blinding mist that makes it nearly impossible to drive. This isn't just about one wet race being delayed. This is about a sport whose machinery and safety procedures are now at odds with the very conditions that used to define its most thrilling moments. And if these cars can't race in the wet, then maybe the conversation needs to shift. Maybe the issue isn't the rain, it's the car design philosophy. Technology has outpaced reality, and until F1 reconciles that truth, we're going to keep losing out on the races that remind us why we fell in love with this sport in the first place. But even with the safety risks understood, it's hard to ignore just how one-sided the F1 decision felt, especially to those drivers who live for these kinds of conditions. Max Verstappen, as analytical as ever, wasn't just speaking out of frustration. He pointed out the exact moment the race could have started. On the formation lap, the rain had stopped. There was a 15-minute window where visibility would have improved with just a few laps behind the safety car. He believed they could have started then, cleared the water, and raced before the next wave of rain arrived. He even addressed the visibility concerns head-on. "It's bad between turns 1 and 5, he said. "But after that, it improves and, if you can't see, lift off the throttle. That's not recklessness, it's racecraft." That's the kind of driver you want in wet conditions. Sharp, experienced, and honest. Hamilton echoed similar sentiments. He could feel the grip was there. His tone over the radio was urgent, insistent. For both of them drivers with world championships and years of elite, wet racing under their belts, it felt like the FIA was undermining their ability to judge the conditions. The irony is that both men had sacrificed grid position and straight-line speed to run more downforce, preparing for a proper wet race. Verstappen in particular had learned his lesson from Silverstone, where Red Bull's skinny rear wing had cost them. This time, they were ready. But when the FIA delayed the race and the track dried, that entire strategy unraveled. All that preparation, undone by a governing body too hesitant to let the sport unfold. And that's what stings, not just for the drivers, but for fans, engineers, strategists, and anyone who still sees F1 as a proving ground for greatness. Everyone understands the need for caution, everyone respects the risks involved. But when every decision is filtered through the lens of what if, what you get isn't a race. It's a risk-managed event, and while drivers like Verstappen and Hamilton may thrive in chaos, there are also young drivers on the grid, many of them rookies who simply haven't had the chance to build that same level of confidence in the wet. Their discomfort is real, and it absolutely factors into the FIA's decision-making. But then what's the answer? Is Formula One going to tailor its conditions to the least experienced on the grid? Or should those drivers be trained, tested, and prepared for the very conditions that once defined the sport? What makes this situation so frustrating is how predictable the outcome was, with overtaking already a challenge at Spa in dry conditions. The only real chance for an unpredictable race was in the wet. But by the time the race actually began, that opportunity had vanished. What we got instead was tire conservation, DRS trains, and a field of drivers managing track position, not fighting for it. The same issue we've seen countless times with the current generation of cars. They're too aero-dependent, too bulky, and too limited when it comes to real racing. Even George Russell, whose dry weather strategy in 2024 turned heads, couldn't do much this time. Clean air was king. As Oscar Piastri put it, once you're out front, it's just about control. That's not a race, it's a procession. And that's exactly what Spa felt like. A missed opportunity for strategy chaos, driver brilliance, and wet weather heroics. Instead, it became a clinic in risk avoidance. This was a track where one mistake used to lead to glory or disaster. It was where champions proved their worth, but that mythology is fading. Spa is starting to feel like a relic. If it's too dangerous to race when wet and too dull when dry, then what's its future? In F1, this isn't just about nostalgia, it's about the evolution of a sport that risks losing its essence. Yet in the middle of this frustration, there were glimmers of brilliance. Alex Albon delivered a sensational drive, putting that Williams in P6. Charles Leclerc held off Verstappen for P3 with grit and perfect timing. The McLarens were dominant. Norris and Piastri looked like they could end the constructors' battle early. Even Hamilton, despite a messy qualifying, showed his veteran class with a comeback that reminded everyone why he's still in the game. But all of that was drowned out by the bigger narrative. Formula One is caught between its identity as an elite motorsport and its obligation to minimize risk at all costs. And every time it chooses safety over spectacle, without finding that middle ground, it chips away at what made this sport legendary. So now we're left with the aftermath of race weekend that promised drama but delivered hesitation. The fans were there, the conditions were right, the drivers were divided, and the FIA, caught in a web of past tragedies and present uncertainty, chose the safest path possible. But Formula One doesn't live in safety, it never has. From its inception, it has been a battleground where danger met glory, where speed met courage, where the rain wasn't a reason to pause, it was a reason to push. And yet, here we are, questioning whether the very thing that made F1 so thrilling, the unpredictability of weather, is still compatible with the cars and culture of the modern sport. The cars are too advanced, the safety standards, while necessary, have now become so dominant that they often dictate the entire structure of a weekend. There's a delicate balance to be struck between honoring the memory of lost drivers and preserving the DNA of racing. Because yes, tragedy must never be forgotten, but neither can we forget what this sport stands for. Without wet weather magic, without the grit and unpredictability of soaked tarmac, F1 becomes just another numbers game, just another perfectly optimized simulation, and that's not what the fans tune in for. That's not what made legends out of Senna at Donington, Schumacher at Barcelona, or Button in Canada. Those moments came from chaos, from adaptability, from racers refusing to be ordinary. Today's F1 drivers are just as talented, but if the sport won't give them the chance to show it in those moments, then what's the point? Maybe it's time for change, not just in race direction, but in car design, tire development, and driver training. Prepare the next generation to handle these conditions. Develop wet tires that don't blind everyone in the first 5 seconds? Build cars that can race in chaos? Because right now, the pinnacle of motorsport is waiting for dry tarmac before turning a wheel. And that's not Formula One, that's fear. Let me know what you think. Was Max Verstappen right to call it out? Should the FIA have taken the risk? Or is modern F1 simply evolving into something more cautious by necessity? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this is the kind of conversation you care about, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. The future of Formula One is being shaped right now, and your voice matters.